Well, our bramble plantings are going dormant for the winter now that it's mid-December, and now's a good time to think about doing some pruning on them. Now, back during the summertime, we preached pretty hard on pruning out the fruiting canes right then, so you could tell which was which between fruiting canes and vegetative canes that will bear fruit next year. But if you haven't done that chore yet, in a few minutes I'll show you how to do that in some raspberries. Now, these blackberries already had almost all of their fruiting canes removed. If we look down in here, there are a few, and you can pretty well see the difference between them. This is an old fruiting cane. It's already turned brown. Then up in here, these bright red canes are vegetative canes that will bear fruit next year. So we can take a few of those old fruiting canes out, although most of them have already been removed. And one other thing that you can do this time of year on blackberries is do some pruning up on the top. This is something you could have also done in the summertime if they'd gotten too tall, too top heavy, and were bending over like this and getting in the way of your lawnmower. But you can also do it this time of year, and that's just topping them back. And if you have a cane such as this one that's bending over too far, just cut it back to a manageable height. One benefit that you'll derive from this is that at harvest time, when they get weighted down with fruit, they won't be bending all the way down to the ground, and that'll be a benefit. Now, if you had done this in the summertime, one benefit would have been that they would have sent out more side shoots. And every bud along here is going to bear blackberries next year. In fact, it'll bear an entire cluster of blackberries. And so if you can keep it back to a manageable size and have lots of side shoots, you'll have more fruit produced in a more compact area. But if you want to prune right now, you can. Let's go over to the black raspberries, or the red raspberries rather. I'll give you some tips on pruning those. It's a little bit different. Red raspberries tend to grow in a bit of a typical bramble patch that you might have read about in childhood stories. Red raspberries tend to send up a lot of shoots all across the planting area instead of from a single crown. And this can become a nuisance in the garden. You can find shoots coming up all over the place. And also it makes pruning a little bit confusing. Now, this one hasn't had any canes taken out. And I want to show you the difference between an old fruiting cane and a vegetative cane that's going to bear fruit next year. They're just like with blackberries, they're on a 2-year growth cycle. Now, this old cane has some of the bark peeling off of it, and obviously it's dying back. Sometimes they'll even have old supporting clusters on them that supported the fruiting growth. The fruiting canes for next year that just grew leaves this summer will have a shiny appearance. They won't have any loose bark on them, and those are the ones that you want to keep. Problem is, you don't want to keep all of them because it can get too crowded. The best thing to do is to first go in and take out the old fruiting canes. Now I'm just going to work on this one plant in our patch here. And this planting is going into its 3rd season. So it's not very big yet and not very hard to do all the pruning on. But I've seen some bramble patches that haven't been pruned for a number of years, and that can be a very big chore. Okay, after you've taken out all the old fruiting canes, the next step is to look at how many canes you have that will be bearing fruit next year. The ideal spacing on these, since they don't grow from a single crown, the ideal spacing in about a 3-foot wide patch is to have them about 6 inches apart. And if you look in here, we really have more than we need for good production. And so I'm going to thin out some that maybe aren't as vigorous a grower as some of the others. And we'll just prune those away. We have a nice big one right here that has some good fat buds on it. Should give us a lot of raspberries next year. I'll keep that one. We have another one about 6 inches away from it that I'll keep. But we have a kind of a wimpy one right next to it that I'll be taking out. The trick with pruning blackberries and raspberries, and one important thing to remember is that they respond very favorably to having lots of light and plenty of air movement in among where they're growing. You'll have more fruit production. You won't end up with all the fruit just on the top or sides. And you'll also find that if you live in eastern Oklahoma and have trouble with fruiting or foliar diseases, you'll have fewer disease problems if you keep them properly pruned. And you'll find that picking's quite a bit easier. Okay, I will have taken out, by the time I'm through here, probably about half of the canes that would bear fruit for the next year. But my result will end up being better quality fruit and fruit that's easier to pick. So what you need to do is go down your entire row and do this. It's a little bit time consuming, but it'll make picking a lot easier chore for next year. Well, the next thing I want to show you in our bramble plantings is the tayberry. Now that is a bramble plant that's a cross between a red raspberry and a blackberry. It gave us some nice fruit last summer, but we found that it does suffer winter injury here in Stillwater. I want to give you some tips on how to protect it and other brambles through the winter if that's a problem that you have in your garden. Well, this is our tayberry plant, and it is one that definitely winter kills here in Stillwater. There are other bramble plants that may give you problems, especially if you live in north central or northwestern Oklahoma. The thornless blackberry is one that sometimes can winter kill. If we get down to temperatures around 10 degrees and have a very dry winter like we're going into right now, you may find that the canes that would have borne fruit will, come spring, have been killed all the way to the ground. Well, there's one way that you can protect them if you want to grow those in that part of the state, and that is to lay the canes down. You want to do this fairly gently so they don't break over, and then put some kind of weight over them. I'm just using a piece of landscape timber, and then put a little bit of insulation on them. I'm just going to use some straw. You could use pine needles or leaves, even grass clippings. And all we're doing is just keeping the cold, drying winds off of the plant. And we found last winter by doing this that we really were able to save the plant. Now there may be some canes that are too brittle to lay down. I have a few of those right here. And I'll just leave those exposed and take my chances. But the majority of them will at least be protected from the cold, drying winds of winter, and hopefully we'll get these through along with all of our other brambles.